everybody. We are live here on YouTube. I have Frodo with me. He's sitting up there. I used to have I used to have more of those, but it's quite a while ago. There was a period where I had to sell some of them, but we're live here, and yeah, I normally go into these phone streams with sort of not very much of a idea of what I'm going to do. You're saying, oh, we'll answer some questions, we'll do some readings, that sort of thing. We did one where it was like we talked a bit about myths transformed in Morgoth's ring. But hey, Coyote. But today I do have a plan, and as you could probably see from the stream title, we're going to talk about allegory, which is sort of a dirty word in the realm of studying Tolkien because of his thoughts on it. We're going to talk about his thoughts on it. We're going to read what he had to say about people interpreting the Lord of the Rings as an allegory. I'll also mention what Christopher, his son, had to say about it as well. But he did write one allegory. It wasn't the Lord of the Rings. It wasn't the Hobbit. It's not found in the Silmarillion or any of its other stories. As a matter of fact, it is completely unconnected to his legendarium, but we'll talk about that. Well, hello there to Dylan and to King Thors. Hopefully we don't get any weirdos in the chat today. We had some weirdos in the chat yesterday who were coming by, and I had to surmise they must have been children. I think what worked, other than Walter banning them, but Walter was banning accounts left and right yesterday. He did a really good job as moderator when we had that sort of invasion of weirdos. But what really worked, because they kept coming back with new or different accounts, but what really worked was when I just stopped acknowledging them completely. So if we get any strange people, any weirdos in there, we're going to. Do you want me to call you Walter, or do you want me to call you Dylan? Because your name used to be Walter White, and then you changed it to you changed it to Restoring the Realm of Rune, but now you're using your real name, so maybe we should just call you Dylan. It's up to you, really. Okay, you're Dylan. All right, so Dylan, the moderator, he did a really good job yesterday, and I think when I started reading, and I remember I was facing this way because I'm holding the book, right? And I can see out of the corner of my eye the chat kept going, right? And I'm thinking, like, I wonder how much of that is these strange children with their weird questions. And it turned out not a whole lot of it, because as soon as I stopped giving them any attention, they stopped. So if we have anybody come by today, I'm not going to acknowledge it. I might say something like clean up the chat. If I say that, you know what to do. Hopefully not. We've had so few problems on lives. Hey Chewy, we've had so few problems. I think the very first time I ever went live on YouTube, we had like one or two people that were misbehaving in the chat, and then nothing at all since then. Actually, wait, that was another one where somebody had to be banned, but that person just wouldn't stop going off topic was the issue. But yeah. I heard about. Hey there, Glorious. I heard about Ace Frehley, and this story kind of affected me, not because I'm a fan, because I'm not. I really didn't like Kiss, and I didn't really know anything about him as a person to comment on what type of person he was. But the story affected me because of the manner that he died was the same way that my grandfather died, pretty much down to a T. That he fell and hit his head and then had a brain bleed and died a few days later. That's what happened to my grandfather. So when I hear about somebody dying in that way, it just kind of brings me back to that time, where he just sort of had a fall, and then it wound up being fatal. Hey, Will, and hey, Hussein, am I saying it right? But yeah, I mean, so as far as that's concerned, I read the story about Ace Frehley, and like I said, I didn't really listen to his music very much. But hey, Alice, I really, like I said, just the manner in which he died affected me a little bit because, like I said, my grandfather died that way, the same exact way, pretty much. That being said, um, yeah, welcome in everybody. So we're going to talk about allegory today, and everybody and their mother and their brother and their sister and their weird uncle and their neighbor kids thinks that they find allegories and they they think they're very 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 clever in finding those allegories. But the thing is that an allegory is usually not something that is all that hidden. It's hidden in the way that it doesn't come out and say what it is. Okay. I'm going to ask that we keep the chat English only, please, so that everybody can understand it. Thank you. And their sister's sister, and their dog's sister. Everybody thinks that I figured it out. The Lord of the Rings is about World War or whatever, or industrialization or whatever. And what Christopher Tolkien said about it is that people find allegories where they will. And what he was being very polite about it. What he was basically saying is that people think everything is an allegory. What Tolkien said about it in a video interview that I had seen was most people who say allegory don't really know what it means. They think they know what it means, you know. And I've gotten a lot of people who have come to me on Quora or wherever who would say, well, of course Tolkien wrote allegory, and I would say, well, no, he didn't, and well, but obviously he did because this thing reminds me of this thing. And I said, well, that's on you, though. That's something that you uh, think. I like my glasses. Like I said, I do need a new prescription, but I hope that I could maybe either keep the same frames or at least get similar ones because I'm rather attached to these. Um, but anyway, so an allegory is something that the author does on purpose. It's not something that the reader finds on their own, and it's intentional. It's intentional. And if you've read, the Chronicles of Narnia, you've read an allegory. That's a very obvious allegory. Um, but anyway, I have two books here. I have The Fellowship of the Ring, and I also have the Tolkien Reader, which this is such a terrible copy, but this is the copy that I've always had. You could tell that it's old and it's been through the ringer, but I have it. And we're going to read Leaf by Neagle. Leaf by Neagle is a short story that he wrote about a painter named Neagle who painted a leaf because he was very good at painting leaves, and then he expanded that leaf, and it's a whole story really about Tolkien himself and about his work and his creative process, and we're going to go through that together. You know. Yeah, I would think that I would think that I should be able to either keep the same frames or get ones that are very similar. Oh, yes, people get allegory and symbolism confused. Tolkien said that people get allegory and application confused. And also people think that any illusion is an allegory. And Tolkien has written many things in his work that are allusions to other things. The biggest example of this is industrialization in Isengard, and it coming home to the Shire is an allusion to his home country of Oxfordshire being industrialized and not being the idyllic thing that he saw in his youth. But of course, Tolkien even told us that if the Lord of the Rings were to be an allegory, it would have been written differently. So I have the Fellowship of the Ring here, and I'm not going to read from the main text, but I'm going to go to his intro here. The prologue, I think? Not the prologue. The forward. There we are. There it is. So I'm going to read a portion of the forward here that talks about his thoughts on allegory. The Lord of the Rings has been read by many people since it finally appeared in print 10 years ago, and I should like to say something here with reference to the many opinions or guesses that I have received or have read concerning the motives and meaning of the tale. The prime motive was the desire of a tale teller to try his hand at a really long story that would hold the attention of readers, amuse them, delight them, and at times maybe excite them or deeply move them. As a guide, I had only my own feelings for what is appealing or moving, and for many the guide was inevitably often at fault. Some who have read the book, or at any rate have reviewed it, have found it boring, absurd, or contemptible, and I have no cause to complain since I have similar opinions of their works, or of the kinds of writings that they evidently prefer. So just to pause there. Hey there, Bonnie Bell. Just to pause there. So he's saying here, I don't mind bad reviews. People say, oh, your book is silly or your book is pretentious or this or that. And he's like, that's fair because you might like things that I don't like. So basically, Tolkien is saying criticism doesn't really bother him because he likes things and he dislikes things, and that's okay. But he's also saying that people have tried to put upon him, to imprint on him a motive other than the motive of that he had. And his motive really was to see, can I tell a story that is really long and that is going to hold people's attention and that they're going to like? And I would say that largely he succeeded due to the popularity of the book, the fact that we're still talking about it today in 2025. That obviously, means that he succeeded. But of course, he recognizes that you can't please all of the people all of the time, and that there are people that didn't like it or found it to be boring or whatever. And he's fine with that. But that his intention was never allegorical. His intention was literally, let's tell a story and let's see if I could write something 1,200 pages long and that it's going to hold their attention and really, that they're going to enjoy it. And in fact, he had complained at many a point in time after the release of The Lord of the Rings that he wished it was longer. He felt it was rushed. We talked about this yesterday, actually, quite a bit, that he felt that The Lord of the Rings was too short and too unsatisfying, that it wasn't finished. We were talking about, I forgot who it was. I think it might have been at Dylan, who asked a question about applying a character to each of the seven deadly sins, a character from, not necessarily from The Lord of the Rings, but from the legendarium as a whole. And going through the seven deadly sins, we were able to quite easily find characters that match each one, except for a sloth. We sort of had issues figuring out one to go along with sloth. And I think there were some misunderstandings of what sloth is. Did he call The Lord of the Rings was a stupendously long narrative in a video we have of him? He said that, he said that absolutely, but he also said that he wished it was longer. So, and he's allowed to change his mind about things too. And I said, I think I got it. I think the character that embodies sloth is J.R.R. Tolkien, due to the fact that he is both a procrastinator and a perfectionist, which somebody else in the chat yesterday pointed out as a diabolical combo. Absolutely diabolical. And people misunderstood gluttony as well. Absolutely. Gluttony has a wide array of applications, and it overlaps a lot with both envy and greed. They're all very linked, but we chose Ungoliant for gluttony. I think that was an obvious choice. Let's continue here to read what his words were. Let's see. Oh, hey, here's where he's going to say what I just said here. But even from the points of view of many who have enjoyed my story, there is much that fails to please. It is perhaps not possible in a long tale to please everybody at all points, nor to displease everybody at the same points. For I find from the letters that I have received that the passages or chapters that are to some a blemish are all by others especially approved. The most critical reader of all, myself, now finds many defects, minor and major, but being fortunately under no obligation either to review the book or to write it again, he will pass over these in silence. Except one that has been noted by others, the book is too short. Yeah. As for any inner meaning or message, it has the intention of the author none. It is neither allegorical nor topical. As the story grows, it puts down roots into the past and throughout unexpected branches. But its main theme was settled from the outset by the inevitable choice of the ring as the link between it and the Hobbit. The crucial chapter, The Shadow of the Past, is one of the oldest parts of the tale. I'm going to switch positions here. It's better, yeah. It was written long before the foreshadow of 1939 had yet become a threat of inevitable disaster. And from that point, the story would have developed along essentially the same lines if that disaster had been averted. Its sources are things long before in mind, or in some cases already written, and little or nothing in it was modified by the war that began in 1939 or its sequels. The real war does not resemble the legendary war in its process or its conclusion. If it had been inspired or directed the development of the legend, then certainly the ring would have been seized and used against Sauron. He would not have been annihilated, but enslaved, and Barad-dûr would not have been destroyed, but occupied. Saruman, failing to get possession of the ring, would in the confusion and treacheries of the time, have found in Mordor the missing links in his own researches into ring lore, and before long he would have made a great ring of his own, with which to challenge the self-styled ruler of Middle-earth. In that conflict, both sides would have held hobbits in hatred and contempt. They would not long have survived, even as slaves. Other arrangements could be devised according to the tastes or views of those who like allegory or topical reference. But I cordially dislike allegory in all its manifestations, and always have done so since I grew old and wary enough to detect its presence. I much prefer history, true or feigned, with its varied applicability to the thought and experiences of readers. I think that many confuse applicability with allegory, but the one resides in the freedom of the reader, and the other in the proposed dominion, or domination rather, of the author. So, as you can see here, it's basically what I said. Hello to everybody that has come in here. I see Teppo, I see Iron Gold Flame, and Jay Hudson and everything. Let's see, who else? We got Sithis is here. So yeah, hello everybody. How's it going? So yeah, basically he's saying, it can't be an allegory for World War II because I came up with the idea before World War II and wrote a lot of it before World War II. And had World War II not happened, the story would have remained exactly the same. But if I did base it on the war, here's the way it would have been, you know? So you can see there that he's saying, if you see something that you think is an allegory, it's not an allegory, it's an application, which means it's something that you came up with and not something that I came up with. And that's fine and that's grand because he likes that sort of thing. I'm going to read just a little bit more here. Other arrangements could be devised according to the tastes or views of those who... Oh, I already read that part. It's the next part. An author cannot, of course, remain wholly unaffected by his experience. Now, this is important because people will say, well, you know, the things that he went through definitely colored what he wrote. And of course it did. And you could say that the thoughts of the author are always found in his work. Even if he attempts to keep them out, they are there. An author cannot, of course, remain wholly unaffected by his experience, but the ways in which a story germ uses the soil of experience are extremely complex. And attempts to define the process are at best guesses from evidence that is inadequate and ambiguous. It is also false, though naturally attractive, when the lives of an author and critic have overlapped, to suppose that the movements of thought or the events of times common to both were necessarily the most powerful influences. One has indeed personally to come under the shadow of war to feel fully its oppression. But as the years go by, it seems now often forgotten that to be caught in youth by 1914 was no less hideous an experience than to be involved in 1939 and the following years. By 1918, all but one of my close friends were dead. Or to take a less grievous matter, it has been supposed by some that the scouring of the Shire reflects the situation in England at the time when I was finishing my tale. It does not. It is an essential part of the plot, foreseen from the outset, though in the event modified by the character of Saruman as developed in the story without, need I say, any allegorical significance or contemporary political reference whatsoever. It has indeed some basis in experience, though slender, for the economic situation was entirely different and much further back. The country in which I have lived in childhood was being shabbily destroyed before I was 10, in days when motor cars were rare objects. I had never seen one, and men were still building suburban railways. Recently I saw in a paper a picture of the last decrepitude of the once thriving corn mill beside its pool that long ago seemed to me so important. I never liked the looks of the young miller, but his father, the old miller, had a black beard, and he was not named Sandyman. So basically he's saying, of course, if you're a writer and you're writing a story, your experiences are going to come through. The things that you think are going to be in your work, but that's not an allegory. Because that's subconscious, and you can't even make yourself write something that doesn't have your experiences or your thoughts into it. Otherwise, what are you even writing, you know? So, so he said he dislikes allegory, but he did write one allegory. It's not found in any of the Legendarium tales. It's not in The Hobbit. It's not in The Lord of the Rings. It's not in the Silmarillion. It's not in Beren and Luthien. It's not in The Children of Húrin, The Fall of Gondolin, or The Fall of Númenor, or any of the unfinished tales. It's not found in any of the shorter stories that are found in the Histories of Middle-earth. It has nothing to do with Tom Bombadil. But it is a little story that we're going to read together today called Leaf by Neagle. And Tolkien, you know, he says he dislikes allegory in all its forms, although he did admit at one point that he liked it when Shakespeare did it, because I think Shakespeare did it well, and that's what it came down to, you know. It's sort of difficult to trash Shakespeare, I think, especially since he's been so influenced by him. Talk to us about Eucatastrophe. Thank you, Core, for the super chat. Okay, you know what? That's in the same book. That's in the same book, actually. Let me find that, and I'll read that for you. Let's see. Let me put you down for a second so I can find the page, because we can talk about Eucatastrophe. It's quite a long bit. If I can find it, maybe I can't find it. I'll just talk to you about it. Eucatastrophe is an interesting thing. We're going to read Leaf by Neagle from Tree and Leaf, which is found in many different collections. I have the Tolkien reader here. If you have Tales from the Perilous Realm, it's in that as well, and some of the other collections. So a eucatastrophe is actually a word that Tolkien invented. And actually, I have another book here that would be useful, which is The Ring of Words. And that would be easier to find, because the parts about each of the words that Tolkien used or possibly invented or co-opted, that's in alphabetical order here, so we can... Here it is, Eucatastrophe. So this starts actually with a little bit from letter 89, which is a letter that he sent to his son Christopher in November of 1944. All of a sudden I realized what it was, the very thing I've been trying to write about and explain. For it, I coined the word eucatastrophe, the sudden, happy turn in a story which pierces you with a joy that brings tears. In his essay on fairy stories, Tolkien identifies the consolatory happy ending as one of the principal defining features of the fairy story, and coins for this word eucatastrophe, which he also gives a theological dimension by applying it to the resurrection, the happy ending of the Gospels. Although this word was not yet entered the Oxford English Dictionary, it has been taken up as a technical term by some writers on fantasy literature. As Tolkien explains, it is based on the Greek word catastrophe, overturning, sudden turn, conclusion. The word catastrophe did historically have a neutral sense in English, the change or revolution which produces the conclusion or final event of a dramatic piece. Samuel Johnson's dictionary, quoted in the Oxford English Dictionary, which gives as a modern equivalent the French loanword denouement. However, its use is now dominated by the negative sense, a conclusion generally unhappy, a disastrous end, finish up, conclusion, upshot, overthrow, ruin, calamitous fate. The notion of a happy catastrophe is so distant from the present understanding of the word that Tolkien felt obliged to invent a new term using the Greek-derived prefix. I have to change it here. U, meaning good or well. He could then use the opposite term, discatastrophe, to refer specifically to a tragic ending. Of course, he did not use the term discatastrophe. They're just musing that he could have done that. So basically, the eucatastrophe is usually the ending, but not always the ending. It's the event that suddenly happens that is so wonderful and changes the story in a major, major way. And we see it in every single one of his stories. I'm going to give you a few examples. In The Hobbit, the moment during the Battle of Five Armies that the eagles arrive is the eucatastrophe. In The Lord of the Rings, it is the moment that the ring is destroyed. In the Silmarillion, there are actually a few examples, but I think the biggest one would be the arrival of Eärendil in the War of Wrath and the defeat of the dragon and Calagon the Black, which turned the tide of the war and led to the defeat of Morgoth. So there we go. Thank you, Bonnie Bell, for the super chat. Thank you very much for the 10. If you want me to read or talk about anything, you can go ahead and request that. Also, we have somebody in the chat that's named Catastropha, which is related to the word catastrophe or eucatastrophe or discatastrophe. Core, thank you again for another super chat. Thank you so much, guys. I saw it. Yes, I did. Didn't I acknowledge it? Oh, it came in right with the other one. That's why I didn't. No, okay, yes, you can get a read. You can get a read. I do want to get to Leaf by Neagle today, but absolutely, I have to acknowledge the super chats. You heading out for your flight? Okay. I hope you have a safe flight, Bonnie Bell, and I hope to see you again soon. Do you want to wait until after Leaf by Neagle, or do you want me to do it now? It's not a very long story, but it's the only story that he told allegorically. It's not very long, and it's an interesting story. I actually read a good amount of it in one of my videos at one point. Let's wait. Okay, let's go to Leaf by Neagle. Here we are. If anybody else does, just tell me and I'll do it afterwards. Anybody that's super chatted, at least. Oh, another. See, now here's the thing. Let's show that. It's hiding the word just because it's similar to another word with some extremely negative connotations. Overturn, exactly. I overturn. We just talked about the definition right before. I don't know if you were here for it or not. You might have just come in right after I talked about it, because we were talking about Tolkien's word eucatastrophe, because we were talking about how the word catastrophe used to have a neutral meaning, and then later, no, you didn't do anything wrong, Time Lord Guy. That's just that other people did other things wrong by having another word that's similar. But anyway, it is more in our modern times become a negative thing. So Tolkien wanted to have something that's like a happy catastrophe, which, as the Greek meaning understood it, was supposed to be possible, but well, words change over times because of the way that we use them. All right, here we go. There was once a little man called Neagle, who had a long journey to make. He did not want to go. Indeed, the whole idea was distasteful to him, but he could not get out of it. He knew he would have to start sometime, but he did not hurry with his preparations. Now, right from the get-go, you guys can probably already guess what's going on, because allegory is always pretty obvious, I think. Will I do your question about Elendis? Did you submit that somewhere, Sithis? I'm not doing Q&A right this moment, but I think I saw your question, Quora, or on YouTube. But Neagle here represents J.R.R. Tolkien. The long journey that he's talking about is death. He's talking about the fact that he knows, just like we all are, we're temporary. He's temporary, you're temporary, I'm temporary. We're only within the circles of the world for a short period of time. overall. Now, people say life is short, but it's also the longest thing you'll ever do. When we look at the history of everything, we're here for a very small bit of it. And he's saying, I have to get my work done before I take my journey, basically. So that's what this is really about. And of course, we know that Tolkien barely finished anything before he died, unfortunately, because, as I mentioned yesterday, and as I mentioned a little while ago, procrastinator, perfectionist. Nigel was a painter, not a very successful one, partly because he had many other things to do. Most of these things he thought were a nuisance, but he did them fairly well when he could not get out of them, which in his opinion was far too often. The laws in his country were rather strict. There were other hindrances too. For one thing, he was sometimes just idle and did nothing at all. For another, he was kind-hearted in a way. You know the sort of kind-heart. It made him uncomfortable more often than it made him do anything. And even when he did anything, it did not prevent him from grumbling, losing his temper, and swearing, mostly to himself. All the same, it did land him in very many odd jobs for his neighbor, Mr. Parrish, a man with a lame leg. Occasionally, he even helped some other people from further off if they came and asked him to. So, Mr. Parrish here, obviously that's the church, and he's saying that, because of his own kind heart, he is disturbed by people in need, and occasionally guilted into actually doing something about it, although he's grumpy about it. And sometimes he goes beyond helping the church. Of course, we know that he was translating the Jerusalem Bible at a point in the very early 50s, and he stopped doing that, specifically because he wanted to write The Lord of the Rings. Clean up the chat, please. Okay, where were we? Occasionally, he even helped some other people further off if they came and asked him to. Also, now and again, there we go. Sorry. Now and again, I accidentally turned 2 pages. It's very uncomfortable because this is a paperback. All right. Also, now and again, he remembered his journey and began to pack a few things in an ineffectual way. At such times, he did not paint very much. So, don't acknowledge it. Just clean it up. That's all. So, what he's saying here is every once in a while, we think of our mortality, and we start to think, well, one day I'm going to not be here anymore. I'm going to go someplace else, or wherever you believe in. Some people believe that we just don't exist anymore, or whatever you might believe in. But I'm not going to be here, and I should make preparations for that. And that doesn't really jibe with trying to finish your life's work, He had a number of pictures on hand. Most of them were too large and ambitious for his skill. He was the sort of painter who could paint leaves better than trees. He used to spend a long time on a single leaf, trying to catch its shape and its sheen and the glistening of dewdrops on its edges. Yet he wanted to paint a whole tree, with all of its leaves in the same style, and all of them different. There was one picture in particular which bothered him. It had begun with a leaf caught in the wind, and it became a tree, and the tree grew, sending out innumerable branches, and thrusting out the most fantastic roots. Strange birds came and settled on the twigs and had to be attended to. Then all round the tree and behind it, through the gaps in the leaves and boughs, a country began to open out. And there were glimpses of a forest marching over the land and of mountains tipped with snow. Nigel lost interest in his other pictures, or else he took them and he tacked them onto the edges of his great picture. Soon the canvas became so large that he had to get a ladder, and he ran up and down it, putting in a touch here and rubbing out a patch there. When people came to call, he seemed polite enough, though he fiddled a little with the pencils on his desk. He listened to what they said, but underneath he was thinking all the time about his big canvas in the tall shed that had been built for it out in his garden, on a plot where he had once grown potatoes. I've actually seen Finish Hobbit. It's very interesting. It might be just bad internet or something like that. The disadvantage of having to do this from my phone is that I'm on Wi-Fi. So the stream quality might not be entirely stable. Wi-Fi is never stable, but you could always watch the video later. Hopefully it turns out good there. He could not get rid of his kind heart. I wish I was more strong-minded, he sometimes said to himself, meaning that he wished other people's troubles did not make him feel uncomfortable. But for a long time he was not seriously perturbed. At any rate, I shall get this one picture done, my real picture, before I have to go on that wretched journey, he used to say. Yet he was beginning to see that he could not put off his start indefinitely. The picture would have to stop just growing and get finished. So this is interesting. If you note that the way that he talks, right? The character is sort of a little similar to Bilbo, and that really tells us a lot about Tolkien and the way that he talked. That or at least the way that he thought that he talked. If you've ever listened to Tolkien talk, he spoke very quickly. He was a little hard to understand because of his very, very thick Oxford um, accent there. But he in his mind, I think he thought of himself as sort of speaking like Bilbo. Was he inserting himself into the story through Bilbo's character? To a certain extent, yes, and to a certain extent, no. I think that he based Bilbo's personality on his own, but he also said that there were other characters that he identified with more. I think the one character that he had that is the most like him is, in terms of morality, is probably Faramir. But in terms of just speech patterns and whatnot, I think you see that the most with Bilbo and Nigel, they're the most like him in terms of at least the way that he perceived himself to be communicating with people. One day, Nigel stood a little way off from his picture and considered it, with unusual attention and detachment. He could not make up his mind what he thought about it, and wished he had some friend who would tell him what to think. Actually, it seemed to him wholly unsatisfactory and yet very lovely. The only really beautiful picture in the world. What he would have liked at that moment would have been to see himself walk in and slap him on the back and say with obvious sincerity, "Absolutely magnificent! I see exactly what you're getting at. Do get on with it and don't bother about anything else. We will arrange for a public pension so that you need not." However, there was no public pension, and one thing he could see, it would need some concentration, some work, hard, uninterrupted work to finish the picture even at its present size. He rolled up his sleeves and began to concentrate. He tried for several days not to bother about other things, but there came a tremendous crop of interruptions. Things went wrong in his house. He had to go and serve in a jury in the town. "Hi, Deborah, how's it going?" A distant friend fell ill. Mr. Parrish was laid up with lumbago, and visitors kept on coming. It was springtime, and they wanted a free tea in the country. Nigel lived in a pleasant little house, miles away from the town. He cursed them in his heart, but he could not deny that he had invited them himself, away back in the winter when he had not thought it an interruption to visit the shops and have tea with acquaintances in the town. So the part about the public pension and all that is really interesting because it tells us something that people forget because when we think of J.R.R. Tolkien as a person, what do we think of? We think of him as an author, right? He wrote a bunch of books. They were very good. They were made into a lot of movies and TV shows and cartoons and such, and we're still talking about them now. But he did not think of himself as an author because that was not his trade. He wrote for his own amusement. He wrote as a hobby, and he wrote stories a lot of times to flesh out the ideas for his constructed languages. But he was a philologist. He was a professor of language. He worked at a school. He wasn't a writer by trade. But he's saying, man, I wish I could just give it all up and just write. But he never felt that that was going to pay the bills and keep the house from falling apart and keep his children fed and happy. So what we have here is sort of the lament of somebody who is doing something that they're very, very passionate about, but isn't their primary source of income. And they're sort of saying, I wish that somebody would come in and say, you know what, I'm going to be your patron, or we're going to set up a pension for you, and we're going to let you do what you do, and you won't have to worry about anything else. And of course, that doesn't happen often in life. It used to happen in the classical world. Artists would have patrons, but it doesn't happen so much today, unfortunately, because I think that's something that's very important. And obviously, Tolkien felt the same way. But he had to do a lot of things. He had to work for the dictionary. He had to go to war. He had to take care of his kids. So he didn't get to write as much as he wanted to write. Let's see. He tried to harden his heart, but it was not a success. There were many things that he had not the face to say no to, whether he thought them duties or not. And there were some things he was compelled to do, whatever he thought. Some of his visitors hinted that his garden was rather neglected, and that he might get a visit from an inspector. Very few of them knew about his picture, of course, but if they had known, it would not have made much of a difference. I doubt they would have thought that it mattered much. I dare say it was not a really very good picture, though. It may have had some good passages. The tree, at any rate, was curious, quite unique in its way. So was Neagle, though he was also a very ordinary and rather silly little man. At length Neagle's time became really precious. His acquaintances in the distant town began to remember that the little man had got to make a troublesome journey, and some began to calculate how long, at the latest, he could put off starting. They wondered who would take his house, and if the garden would be better kept. The autumn came, very wet and windy. The little painter was in his shed. He was up on the ladder trying to catch the gleam of the westering sun on the peak of a snow mountain, which he had glimpsed just to the left of the leafy tip of one of the tree's branches. He knew that he would have to be leaving soon, perhaps early next year. He could only just get the picture finished, and only so, at that. There were some corners there that he would not have time now to do more than hint at what he wanted. So what we're seeing here is he talked about this in one of his letters. I forget the actual number. I want to say that it was like it was one of those palindrome numbers, 131 or 151, something along those lines, And it was a letter that he sent to a prospective publisher. He was shopping around a little bit. He, of course, had his own publisher, and they had published The Hobbit, and they were going to publish The Lord of the Rings. However, he wanted to publish the Silmarillion alongside The Lord of the Rings. The way that he envisioned it as two works with a smaller sort of short story bridging the two, with the Silmarillion here and the Lord of the Rings over here, and in the middle was a little story he wrote called The Rings of Power. And he wanted to publish it all as one epic, which at that time he called the Saga of the Three Jewels and the Rings of Power. However, that didn't happen because his publisher told him, we're really only interested in the part that you wrote that is a sequel to your hit book, The Hobbit. We want more of The Hobbit, basically. We want The Hobbit Part 2. So we're not really interested in the Silmarillion or the Rings of Power. We're only interested in the Lord of the Rings. So, obviously, he had to really just go with that. And eventually, the Silmarillion got published, but he was already gone. And his son had to edit it together from a lot of unfinished drafts. And the story that he called The Rings of Power wound up being the last chapter of the Silmarillion, of the Rings of Power in the Third Age. And even then, it wasn't really complete because a large portion of the Rings of Power wound up being told in The Lord of the Rings in the chapter The Council of Elrond. So he knew that he was never going to finish it unless he had a publication deal. Unless he had somebody that was willing to publish the Silmarillion, he wasn't ever going to finish it. And he knew that. And there was another publisher, I think they were based out of Italy, and he was told maybe write to them and explain everything and see what they say. And it's one of his most illuminating letters because he writes to this guy and basically tells the whole story of the Legendarium from beginning to end and everything that he envisioned and why he's wanting this to be all one thing. And he said at one point that he knew, even then, that it was only going to be an outline, the Silmarillion, and that it was going to be spun out into these grander stories, and some of them he would be able to write in full, and other, like the Children of Hurin, for example, and others he would only leave the skeleton of the story, and that other people would carry them on after he passed on. And unfortunately, this thread of talking to this publisher, I believe was from Italy, did not go very far because the man that he was conversing with through letters became very ill, and he became more interested in his own health than in publishing Tolkien's Silmarillion, and it never went anywhere. And he wound up publishing The Lord of the Rings on its own. I don't know whether he expected his son to finish his work or not. He made him what the title that he called him was literary executor, which basically meant that Christopher was in charge of all the editing and what would be published and what would not be published. But Christopher did only just a little tiny little bit of writing. I think that he didn't think of himself as a writer, and he was very uncomfortable with revising or adding to his father's work because his father was like the biggest person in the universe to him, so he deified his father's work to a certain extent. And I think that to Christopher Tolkien to let's say to finish a story that was unfinished, like The Fall of Gondolin, would be like trying to like rewrite the Bible or something like that. So which obviously he would have thought, well, you don't do that. So I think that we see this a little bit here in Leaf by Nigel when he's saying, you know what, I might be able to finish parts of this, but I'm not going to finish all of it. And he's acknowledging that. And this is what I'm talking about how The Lord of the Rings is not an allegory. This story is an allegory because the allegory is so obvious. Everything just jumps out at you, and you know exactly what he's talking about. All right, let's continue here. The autumn came very wet and windy. The little painter was in his shed. He was up. Oh, I already read that part. Let me skip ahead here. Here we go. There was a knock at the door. Come in, he said sharply, and climbed down the ladder. He stood on the floor, twiddling his brush. It was his neighbor, Parish. His only real neighbor. All other folk lived a long way off. Still, he did not like the man very much, partly because he was so often in trouble and in need of help, and also because he did not care about painting, but was very critical about gardening. When Parish looked up at Nigel's garden, which was often, he most saw weeds, and when he looked at Nigel's pictures, which was seldom, he saw only green and grey patches and black lines, which seemed to him nonsensical. He did not mind mentioning the weeds, a neighborly duty, but he refrained from giving any opinion of the pictures. He thought this was very kind, and he did not realize that even if it was kind, it was not kind enough. Help with the weeds and perhaps praise for the pictures would have been better. Well, Parish, what is it? Said Nigel. I oughtn't interrupt you, I know, said Parish, without a glance at the picture. You're very busy, I'm sure. Nigel had meant to say something like that himself, but he had missed his chance. All he said was, yes. All right, getting to the next page here. But I have no one else to turn to, said Parish. Quite so, said Nigel with a sigh. One of those sighs that are a private comment, but which are not made quite inaudible. What can I do for you? My wife has been ill for some days, and I'm getting worried, said Parish. And the wind has blown the tiles off my roof, and water is pouring into the bedroom. I thought I ought to get to the doctor, and the builders too, only they take so long to come. I was wondering if you had any wood and canvas you could spare, just to patch me up and see me through for a day or two. Now he did look at the picture. Dear, dear, said Nigel, you are unlucky. I hope it is no more than a cold that your wife has got. I come round presently, and help you move the patient downstairs. Thank you very much, said Parish, rather coolly, but it is not a cold, it is a fever. I should not have bothered you for a cold. And my wife is in bed downstairs already. I can't get up and down with trays, not with my leg. But I see you are busy, sorry to have troubled you. I had rather hoped you might have been able to spare the time to go for the doctor, seeing as how I'm placed, and the builder too, if you really have no canvas you can spare. Of course, said Nigel. The other words were in his heart, which at the moment was merely soft without feeling at all kind. I could go. I'll go if you're really worried. I am worried, very worried. I wish I was not lame, said Parrish. So Neagle went. You see, it was awkward. Parrish was a neighbor, and everyone else a long way off. I'm sorry, I'm really finding this very difficult, but I'm making it work. Neagle had a bicycle, and Parrish had not, and could not ride one. Parrish had a lame leg, a genuine lame leg, which gave him a good deal of pain. It had to be remembered, as well as his sour expression and whining voice. Of course, Neagle had a picture, and barely time to finish it. But it seemed that this was a thing that Parrish had to reckon with, and not Neagle. Parrish, however, did not reckon with pictures, and Neagle could not alter that. Curse it, he said to himself, as he got out his bicycle. It was wet and windy, and daylight was waning. No more work for me today, thought Neagle, and all the time he was riding, he was either swearing to himself or imagining the strokes of his brush on the mountain and on the spray of leaves beside it that he had first imagined in the spring. His fingers twitched on the handlebars. Now he was out of the shed. He saw exactly the way in which to treat that shining spray which framed the distant vision of the mountain. But he had a sinking feeling in his heart, a sort of fear that he would never now get a chance to try it out. Hey, Starboy, how's it going? So, what you're seeing here is, and this is very relatable, I think, he's had an issue with his painting that he was working out, and only now that he's not working on it does he figure out how to proceed. But now he's on this trip, he's got to go and fetch a doctor and a builder and all this stuff, right? And this is really what he's talking about here is he's talking about writer's block. And Core, thank you for the super chat. Thank you. Of the three main stories of I assume you mean Elder Days, Beren and Luthien, Children of Huda, and Fall of Gondolin, none are fully fleshed out, sadly. Out of what we have, I love Beren and Luthien the most. The most fleshed out is the Children of Huda, and you just have to... back in the day, we had to sort of like... skip around different books. You'd have to start with I've had friends in Massachusetts. I don't think I know anybody there now, though, but I did have some friends in Massachusetts. But everybody moves around. You'd have to start in Unfinished Tales and then move over to the Silmarillion and then come back to Unfinished Tales. The novelized form, I would say, is about 95% complete. There's still a bit of that sort of skeletal storytelling that you get in the Silmarillion where it's not like really fleshed out, but it's really just the middle part. The Children of Húrin is my favorite Tolkien story. However, I don't think it's his very best writing. His very best writing was when he was really starting to flesh out the Fall of Gondolin. Unfortunately, that's not finished. He got to the point where Tuor went beyond the Seven Gates and entered into Gondolin, and then, he died, so he didn't get to finish it. So that's his very best writing. It's in Unfinished Tales under the title of Tuor and His Coming to Gondolin. It's actually the very first story in Unfinished Tales. And also, it's in the book that's called The Fall of Gondolin, that it's just called the last version, But as for completed stories, The Children of Húrin is absolutely my favorite. It would definitely be The Children of Húrin. Thank you very much for the super chat there, Core. Thank you very much. All right, the follow. Yeah, well, it is unfinished. And I'm talking. The version of it in the Silmarillion is pretty good. And there's a finished version that he did that's an older version. And that is in the Book of Lost Tales Part 2. However, what I'm talking about is when he went back and decided to write it as this really very long, very detailed story in a writing style not that different from The Lord of the Rings. And that was really, really good. That was really, really good. The War of the Jewels that has so much great lore on the elves. And not too long ago, we read The Awakening of the Elves from that. I think it was Laurel that asked for that. I'm not sure though. But anyway, let's continue with Leaf by Neagle here. Let's see. Neagle found the doctor, and he left a note at the builder's. The office was shut, and the builder had gone home to his fireside. Neagle got soaked to the skin and caught a chill himself. The doctor did not set out as promptly as Neagle had done. He arrived the next day, which was quite convenient for him, as by that time there were two patients to deal with in neighboring houses. Neagle was in bed with a high temperature and marvelous patterns of leaves and involved branches forming in his head and on the ceiling. Now, this part is really interesting because the main character here is coming up with these fantastic ideas while sick. And this actually did happen to J.R.R. Tolkien. He was very young, and he had joined the army, and he had gone to war. He was he was in the Signal Corps, and he was an officer, but he did wound up in the Somme. And the Somme was just a terrible, terrible situation. The trench warfare and all the lice and the sickness. Everybody was packed together. Most of his friends died at this time. He got really sick with a malady called trench fever. And trench fever is not usually serious. It's almost never fatal. Usually it's a pretty mild thing that you get over. But he had a really, really bad case of it. So he wound up in the hospital. And that's when his wife was allowed to be with him. And that's when he came up with the ideas for Beren and Luthien and the Fall of Gondolin. And a little bit later than that, he came up with the idea for the Children of Húrin. So, and he wrote a lot of poetry in that time. So, this is where we see, while Neagle is sick, he caught a cold, going to help somebody else, which is, we could say going off to war for his country. And, he himself became sick, but he came up with lots of ideas while he was sick. Now, of course, it's not a one-to-one recreation of his life, because this is happening, we'll say, later in life, whereas, he was very young when he had the trench fever. But he is putting a lot of himself into the story here, obviously. I have to change pages here. It did not comfort him to learn that Mrs. Parrish had only a cold and was getting up. He turned his face to the wall and buried himself in leaves. This is the allegory, yes, exactly. He remained in bed some time. The wind went on blowing. It took away a good many more of Parrish's tiles and some of Neagle's as well. His own roof began to leak. The builder did not come. Neagle did not care for a day or two. Then he crawled out to look for some food. Neagle had no wife. Parrish did not come round, and the rain had got into his leg and made it ache, and his wife was busy mopping up water and wondering if that Mr. Neagle had forgotten to call the builder. Had she seen any chance of borrowing anything useful, she would have sent Parrish round, leg or no leg, but she did not, so Neagle was left to himself. And isn't this just sort of like how it goes, right? He goes out of his way to do things for other people, and then when he's in need, it doesn't really happen to him, right? Oh, man. But yet his own fantasy was still so bright and joyous and focused on many of the good things in life. Well, that came later. That came when he had children. Because it's when he had children that he wrote The Hobbit. You have to remember the three stories that I talked about that he started to write while he was sick, or started to come up with the ideas and write them down. The Fall of Gondolin, Beren and Luthien, and the Children of Húrin. And two of them are his very darkest stories. And Beren and Luthien is really for his wife, That's the one. But it's also a story about mortality as well, because Beren has to die twice, Luthien has to sing for Mandos, it's a whole thing. He lost his hand, all his friend Finrod gets killed, all these terrible, terrible things happened, all because he fell in love with somebody who was not like him, who was above his station, which is the way that Tolkien felt about his wife. He felt that she was too good for him. She was the elf princess and he was the lowly man. So and that doesn't make Beren and Luthien an allegory. It just means that his thoughts are in the work. So you know, the more whimsical stuff I think came later when he had children, because that's, you know, the real joy in everything. Having children is a wonderful thing if you want to have them, and if you have the temperament to have children. And Tolkien certainly really liked children. He respected children too, which you don't often see. So he, you know, he was a very good at that. You know. Was his wife more posh than him? No, it's not that he was more posh than him. It's just that he looked at her as being the most beautiful person in the world. She was a little bit older than him, but the biggest thing was that they had different religions. And Tolkien's father died when he was only 3 years old, so he didn't really ever really know his father. So his father figure was really his priest, and his priest, you know, as father figure, you know, in some ways he did a good job, but in some ways not so much. And one of the worst things that he did was he told him, "You can't marry somebody who's not Catholic." And then, you know, Edith was so in love with him that she gave up her own religion. She was a Protestant, and she became a Catholic to be with him. And then, even then, he says you're not even allowed to date her until you're 21 years old, which I think is ridiculous. But, you know, especially, you know, that he was, you know, as soon as he turned, you know, he went to college in the time, and he was so frustrated about the whole situation that his first year of college he was pretty much a troublemaker, you know. But anyway, he thought, well, if you give up your religion for love, that's sort of like giving up immortality, right? Because she really believed in the, you know, and not to say that they're all that different. It's just a different dogma, right? They're both Christian religions, but you tell that to a Catholic or to a Protestant, and they get very angry about it. Well, some of them really. Matt wouldn't get angry about it. Matt's a Catholic, but um, you know, what's interesting here is, so he's thinking, like, if you're willing to give up your religion to be with somebody, that really is like giving up immortality. And that's the idea of Luthien giving up her mortality to be with Beren, or Arwen giving up her immortality to be with Aragorn. So we do see that in his work, you know. Doesn't make an allegory, though. Yeah, C.S. Lewis had a hard life too. I mean, the guy that guy went through the ringer as well. But he, you know, C.S. Lewis is interesting because he was a rather jolly fellow. You know, he didn't get maudlin like Tolkien did. You know, um, you know, C.S. Lewis was, you know, there's a character based on him in The Lord of the Rings, and it's Treebeard. So if you ever read Treebeard and you think this is Tolkien sort of poking fun at one of his friends, there you have it, you know, your tree. There's a really great YouTuber. I unfortunately do not know her name, but she does a lot of little shorts. And she did this one where she does a really good Tolkien impression, by the way. And she has the thing about Tolkien and C.S. Lewis creating characters based on each other, and C.S. Lewis sort of explaining, I made a character that's based on you, and he's a professor, and he's very wise, and he has lots of knowledge, and he's a really great character. And Tolkien's like, I made a character based on you, he's a tree. You know. So um were the loss of the Entwives meant to correlate to the loss of C.S. Lewis's wife? No, no. He wouldn't do that. That would be rather distasteful, I think. um the Entwives was just really, I mean, he just threw that out there to sort of explain why all the Ents were male. That there were female Ents, but they were just sort of like, we didn't know where they were, and he wanted to have a question that he would never answer, because, you know, that's how you create a believable world. Not everything has an answer in reality. Not everything has an answer in fantasy, in good fantasy at least. You know, the Ents, like I said, he only based the one character off of C.S. Lewis, and he actually didn't originally intend that. Treebeard started out in the very early writings as a very sort of nefarious character who was working with Saruman, and then when he decided to base him on C.S. Lewis, he made him good. And Core, thank you for the super chat. Personally discerning the Catholic faith, just sharing. You know, it's really interesting because the inherent Catholicness of the Lord of the Rings wasn't something that he intended. He just sort of found it after he wrote his like first draft and he finished the book, and he looked back on it and he said, "Wow, that's pretty Catholic," you know. He said, "Wow, the lembas bread, and yeah, there's a lot of, you know." So then when he went back and he was revising things, he made it a little bit more obvious, you know. The lembas bread, originally sort of like a continuation of his early idea of lempa, which was something that the elves would eat in his earliest stories to keep themselves young. Um, but he changed it to being something. Well, he said it was the Eucharist, which I always thought it was more like manna, you know, like from Exodus in the Bible. But he said he was the one who wrote it, you know. The professor in Narnia is based on Tolkien, and there's a similar professor in the Out of the Silent Planet, that whole trilogy that's also based on Tolkien. It's actually, yeah. So yes, absolutely, the professor in Narnia is based on J.R.R. Tolkien. Treebeard's based on C.S. Lewis. What can you do about that? I don't know what you could do about that, man. I don't know why you would come to me for advice on that, but I mean, is your neighbor somebody that you could talk to, you know, and have a conversation with? Because you know, there's nothing wrong with feeding pigeons and all that, but I think that if he's going to do that, he should clean up the mess that they leave, right? Yeah. So there you go. There you go, Dylan. And giving up a religion for love is a really, really profound and powerful thing. There's not a lot of people that do that sort of thing, you know? So yeah, he's just too nice to tell him off. Oh, so yeah, I mean, that's like Neagle, right? He wishes he could tell Mr. Parrish to just, you know, become airborne and engage in relations with a torus-shaped pastry that is moving, if you catch my drift. So yes, yeah, and I think that, you know, like, people can see a people pleaser and they can take advantage of it, and you absolutely see that with Mr. Parrish, who is there to represent the church and represent the state as well, and he's always off. He's helping the church, he's helping his country and everything. But what do they really do for him? You know, a whole lot of nothing. Um, Tolkien was a very religious man. You know, people say, well, he was a devout Catholic. Well, he was a Catholic, and he was a man of faith. He absolutely believed. However, he didn't like the church. He found most priests to be terrible people. He hated the whole ritual of confession. You know, obviously, there were things that he liked about the Catholic Church. Yes, yes. Actually, C.S. Lewis was an atheist, and he actually, in a very, very wonderful way, because some people can be really annoying when they try to convince you one way or the other, whether you believe in God or not. There's always the person that's on the opposite side of you that's trying to bring you to their side. And Tolkien did it in kind of the smart way through friendship and everything. He didn't try to badger the man or tell him that he was wrong or that he was going to hell or whatever. He just tried to show him the good things that you can find in faith. And then, of course, he was rather annoyed because C.S. Lewis was, I believe, an Anglican or something like that. He was a Protestant nonetheless. And oh no, you know what it was? It was the Church of England. He joined the Church of England, and Tolkien was sort of like, well, you know, Jesus is Jesus, so you know, we'll take that as a win. But I wish you would have joined my club, you know. Disappointed, but not, you know, he wasn't horrible about it, is what I'm getting at. You know, he was like, hey, you know, it's still better than what we had before, at least, you know, from his perspective, you know. Because Tolkien felt that you know, religion could be a source of great joy. And C.S. Lewis came to see it that way as well. Although C.S. Lewis, I think I really like his way of looking at things, because he understood the roots of it all. And you know, when he talked about like some of the stuff that Tolkien wrote some stuff that upset the Catholic Church. And you see it in some of his letters. There was a Catholic bookstore owner that wrote to him about the Lord of the Rings. Corey, thank you again for the super chat. You thought of Mana too? Yes, Lembas and the Eucharist. You never saw. I know. Yeah, I know. I don't see it either. But that, you know, he's the author. He wrote it. He gets to say whatever, you know, it is, right? Yeah, that's exactly what it is. He liked what he liked. He liked smoking his pipe. He liked eating mushrooms. He liked going to. But you have to also understand that going to the pub and drinking with people, that was, the chat room of the day. That's how people in rural England connected with each other. That's how you met people. That's how you had conversations with people. That was the social circles. So that was something that it wasn't just a token thing. Everybody did that. Everybody went to pubs and they drank with each other, and that was just a common thing. But of course, he enjoyed it, because somebody who is sort of as grumpy as Tolkien is, and he still went out and socialized with people, and that's how you socialize with people. I was getting at a point here. Oh, about C.S. Lewis and all that. Um, yeah, there was a Catholic bookstore owner. His name was Peter something or other. Peter Hastings. It was Peter Hastings. He wrote to Tolkien, and it was a rather sort of like critical thing where he said the Lord of the Rings is the exact phrase that he used was bad theology, and he didn't like some of the ideas that he had put into his work, most particular the idea of reincarnation, because he said that was not a device that God has used. And Tolkien, his answer was, well, it's not theology. You could say that it's bad theology, but it's not meant to be theology. It's meant to be literature, perhaps didactic, but certainly not theological. It's a story. And about the reincarnation thing, you say that God has not used that device, but who's to say that he won't at some point? He could do whatever he wants. So Tolkien's attitude was sort of like, "Hey, man, leave me alone," and see, and some people said that there were things in his stories that were pagan, which is it's a word that has a definition, but a lot of people sort of ignore the definition, and they just use it as a catch-all phrase for anything that they really don't like. But C.S. Lewis was really smart about it because he said there's so much paganism in Christianity that to ignore it would be a great disservice to people who are Christians, and to you're really missing out on a lot there. What drink of choice would I choose at a pub if I could drink with Tolkien? Obviously, beer. He would be drinking beer. I like beer. I probably would, if we were in England, I would say, could you get me a cold beer? Because, in England, they drink it warm a lot. Hi from Scotland. Hello there, Bubblegum Pink. How is it going? Although in our modern world, I think a lot of England has come around to cold beer. Perhaps I would say ale because that's usually served cold. But yeah, definitely, I would drink beer with it. I would just try to just wave away the pipe smoke. I can't stand that kind of thing. All right, let's continue on here with Leaf by Neagle. Let's see. Here we are. At the end of a week or so, Neagle tottered out to his shed again. He tried to climb the ladder, but it made his head giddy. He sat and looked at the picture, but there were no patterns of leaves or visions of mountains in his mind that day. He could have painted a far-off view of a sandy desert, but he had not the energy. Next day he felt a good deal better. He climbed the ladder and began to paint. He had just begun to get into it again when there came a knock at the door. "Damn," said Neagle. But he might just as well have said, "Come in," politely, for the door opened all the same. This time a very tall man came in, a total stranger. "This is a private studio," said Neagle. "I am very busy. Go away." "I am an inspector of houses," said the man, holding up his appointment card so that Neagle and his ladder could see it. "Oh," he said. "Your neighbor's house is not satisfactory at all," said the inspector. "I know," said Neagle. "I took a note to the builders a long time ago, but they had never come." "Then I have been ill." "I see," said the inspector, "but you are not ill now." "But I am not a builder. Parish ought to make a complaint to the town council and get help from the emergency service." "They are busy, with worse damage than any up there," said the inspector. "There has been a flood in the valley, and many families are homeless. You should have helped your neighbor to make temporary repairs and prevent the damage from getting more costly to spend than necessary. That is the law. There is plenty of material here. Canvas, wood, waterproof paint." "Where?" said Neagle indignantly. "There," said the inspector, pointing to the picture. "My picture!" exclaimed Neagle. "I dare say it is," said the inspector, "but houses come first. That is the law." "But I can't Neagle said no more, for at that moment another man came in. Very much like the inspector he was, almost his double, tall, dressed all in black. "Come along," he said, "I'm the driver." Neagle stumbled down from his ladder. His fever seemed to have come on again, and his head was swimming. He felt cold all over. "Driver, driver," he chattered. "Driver of what?" "You and your carriage," said the man. Let's move on here. Pipe smoking is an allegory? That's ridiculous. It's almost something out of Kafka. Oh, yes. Absolutely. There was a story that Kafka wrote called, I believe it was called The Trial, and you get this sort of sense of being put upon and being helpless here. And, just people saying that is the law, you should have done this, or you should have done that, and you must be punished. I sound like Gandalf when I do that. But, it's Kafka-esque. Absolutely, 100%. I have to fully agree with you there, Time Lord. He cordially disliked Allegory. He didn't hate it. He wouldn't use the word hate, but he cordially disliked it. "The carriage was ordered long ago. It has come at last. It is waiting. You start today on your journey, you know." "There now," said the inspector, "you'll have to go, but it's a bad way to start on your journey, leaving your jobs undone. Still, we can at least make something use of this canvas now." "Oh, dear," said poor Neagle, beginning to weep. "And it's not even finished." "Not finished," said the driver. "Well, it's finished with, as far as you're concerned at any rate. Come along." Neagle went, quite quietly. The driver gave him his time to pack, saying that he ought to have done that before, and they would miss the train. So all Neagle could do was grab a little bag in the hall. He found that it contained only a paint box and a small book of his own sketches, neither food nor clothes. They caught the train all right. Neagle was feeling very tired and sleepy. He was hardly aware of what was going on when they bundled him in his compartment. He did not care much. He had forgotten where he was supposed to be going or what he was going for. The train ran almost at once into a dark tunnel. Neagle woke up at a very large, dim railway station. A porter went along the platform shouting, but he was not shouting the name of the place. He was shouting Neagle. Neagle got out in a hurry and found that he had left his little bag behind. He turned back, but the train had gone away. "There you are," said the porter. "This way. What, no baggage? You'll have to go to the workhouse." Neagle felt very ill and fainted on the platform. They put him in an ambulance and took him to the workhouse infirmary. He did not like the treatment at all. The medicine they gave him was bitter. The officials and attendants were unfriendly, silent, and strict, and he never saw anyone else except a very severe doctor who visited him occasionally. It was more like being in a prison than in a hospital. He had to work hard at stated hours at digging, carpentry, and painting bare boards in one plain color. He was never allowed outside, and the windows all looked inwards. They kept him in the dark for hours at a stretch, to do some thinking, they said. He lost count of time. He did not even begin to feel better, not if they could be judged by whether he felt any pleasure in doing anything. He did not even when getting into bed. At first, during the first century or so, I am merely giving his impressions, he used to worry aimlessly about the past. One thing he kept on repeating to himself as he lay in the dark: "I wish I had called on Parish the first morning after the high winds began. I meant to. The first loose tiles would have been easy to fix. Then Mrs. Parish might never have caught cold. I should not have caught cold either. Then I should have had a week longer." But in time he forgot what it was that he had wanted a week longer for. If he worried at all after that, it was about his jobs in the hospital. He planned them out, thinking how quickly... I have to change here. Hold on a second. How the heck did I lose my spot? Here we are. How quickly he could stop that board creaking, or rehang that door, or mend the table leg. Perhaps he really became rather useful, though no one ever told him so. But that, of course, cannot have been the reason why they kept the poor little man so long. They may have been waiting for him to get better and judging better by some odd medical standard of their own. At any rate, poor Neagle got no pleasure out of his life. Not what he had been used to call pleasure. He was certainly not amused. This is why I hate paperbacks. But it could not be denied that he began to have a feeling of, well, satisfaction. Bread rather than jam. He could take up a task in the moment one bell rang and lay it aside promptly the moment the next one went, all tidy and ready to be continued at the right time. He got through quite a lot in a day now. He finished small things off neatly. He had no time of his own except alone in his bed cell, and yet he was becoming master of his time. He began to know just what he could do with it. There was no sense of rush. He was quieter inside now, and at resting time he could really rest. Then suddenly they changed all his hours. They hardly let him go to bed at all. They took him off carpentry altogether and kept him plain digging day after day. He took it fairly well. It was a long while before he ever began to grope in the back of his mind for the curses that he had practically forgotten. He went on digging till his back seemed broken, his hands were raw, and he felt that he could not manage another spadeful. Nobody thanked him, but the doctor came out and looked at him. I do need a phone holder. Well, here's the thing. Oh, I didn't drop it. I put it down for a moment because I'm trying to wrestle with this tiny paperback, and it's difficult to see the words that are sort of in the middle there, you know. Sorry about that, Deborah. I should have warned you. I should have said I'm going to put you down for a moment. Knock off, he said. Complete rest in the dark. Neagle was lying in the dark, resting completely, so that, as he had not been either feeling or thinking at all, he might have been lying there for hours or for years, as far as he could tell. But now he heard voices, not voices that he had ever heard before. They seemed to be a medical board or perhaps a court of inquiry going on close at hand in an adjoining room, with the door open, possibly, though he could not see any light. Now the Neagle case, said a voice, a severe voice, more severe than the doctor's. Probably, I got this at a bookshop in upstate New York back in like the early 90s or so, you know. We're reading a short story by J.R.R. Tolkien called Leith by Neagle. That's what we are reading currently. Let's see, where were we? Here we were. What was the matter with him? Said a second voice, a voice that you might have called gentle, though it was not soft. It was a voice of authority, and sounded at once hopeful and sad. What was the matter with Neagle? His heart was in the right place. Yes, but it did not function properly, said the first voice, and his head was not screwed on tight enough. He hardly ever thought at all. Look at the time he wasted, not even amusing himself. He never got ready for his journey. He was moderately well off, and yet he arrived here almost destitute, and had to be put in the pauper's wing. A bad case, I'm afraid. I think I should stay some time yet. His only allegory, exactly. It would not do him any harm, perhaps, said the second voice, but of course, he is only a little man. He was never meant to be anything very much, and he was never very strong. Let us look at the records. Yes, there are some favorable points, you know. So at this point, what has happened is the character has died. And he has been in this hospital, which is an allegory in this case for purgatory. Of course, Tolkien being a Catholic, he would believe that he would have to go to purgatory and sort of learn how to let go of everything before he could move onwards. And that's what's happening here. He's forgotten all the things he didn't remember. He doesn't remember his paintings. He doesn't remember even the curse words that he used to know, and he just sort of is going through the motions and trying to sort of live his life. He didn't say what he said was that Tolkien. You have to read that letter very carefully. I know exactly the passage you're talking about, David. He is saying that he's only an allegory in the sense that people would think in the common sort of definition of allegory that people come up with, which he calls an application. He did not intend for him to be specifically allegorical, only that he does represent what he refers to as natural science in the realm of Middle-earth. So he's sort of like an allegory and not an allegory at the same time. But he's not a story. He's a small part of a story. It's the Tolkien Reader. Yeah. This is the one. The Tolkien Reader. I really should get a nice hardcover of like Tales from the Perilous Realm so I could read these stories without having to do, you know, to hold it like this. But like if I had a phone stand, it would be easier, right? But let's continue along here. And of course, we're seeing here judgment. We're saying, oh, his heart was in the right place, and he tried, yeah, but he didn't try hard enough, and this is Tolkien's own thoughts on what his own judgment might be. Oh, I have to go to the next. Yours is really yellow, published 1970 something. That's the exact one I have. There's a little bit of yellowing there at the top there, and the insides you can see are yellowing. But unfortunately, like I said, I got this at a used bookshop in he was sophisticated and be bothered, just like Bilbo. Yes, he's very put upon. Somebody used the term Kafkaesque, or they said it reminded them of Kafka. Absolutely, he's definitely writing like Franz Kafka here. Perhaps, said the first voice, but very few that will really bear examination. Well, said the second voice, there are these. He was a painter by nature, in a minor way, of course, still. A leaf by Neagle has a charm of its own. He took a great deal of pains with leaves, just for their own sake. But he never thought that made him important. There was no note in the records of his pretending, even to himself, that it excused his neglect of things ordered by the law. So when he says the law, what he really means is the natural law. He doesn't literally mean that that he did anything illegal in writing the Lord of the Rings instead of doing other things that he maybe should have been doing. What he's saying, though, is that he may have neglected his story by doing other things, but he also may have neglected other things by doing his story. And what is right in this is what's being hashed out here in this conversation. Then he should not have neglected so many, said the first voice. All the same, he did answer a good many calls. Now, this is really important. Calls. He is putting that in a capital C. And when Tolkien takes a random word and capitalizes it, he's usually applying some sort of spiritual significance to it. We see it in The Lord of the Rings when Tolkien speaks of a word of command. He uses a capital C for command because that is Gandalf using his full angelic authority to do something. In that case, it was to use magic to bar a door. And that's when he realized that he was really in trouble because the Balrog was able to counter this spell. And that's when he said, I've met my match and I've nearly been destroyed. He knew that he was up against something that was equal to himself at the very least. So you have to understand that when he says a call, he's talking about something from a higher authority, something that he had to do, such as helping Mr. Parrish, or doing this or doing that. And he's saying, well, he did do these things. A small percentage, mostly of the easiest sort, and he called those interruptions, capital I in interruptions. The records are full of the word, together with a lot of complaints and silly imprecations. True, but they looked like interruptions to him, of course, poor little man, and here is this. He never expected any return, capital R on return, as so many of his sort call it. There is the Parrish case, the one that came in later. He was Neagle's neighbor, never did a stroke for him, and seldom showed any gratitude at all. But there is no note in the records that Neagle expected Parrish's gratitude. He does not seem to have thought about it. Yes, that is a point, said the first voice, but rather small. I think you will find Neagle often merely forgot. Things he had to do for Parrish he put out of his mind as a nuisance he had done with. Still, there is this last report, said the second voice. That wet bicycle ride, I should lay stress on that. It seems plain that this was a genuine sacrifice. Neagle guessed that he was throwing away his last chance with his picture, and he guessed, too, that Parrish was worrying unnecessarily. I think you put it too strongly, said the first voice. But you have the last word. It is your task, of course, to put the best interpretation on the facts. Sometimes they will bear it. What do you propose? I think it's case for a little gentle treatment now, said the second voice. Neagle thought that he'd never heard anything so generous as that voice. It made gentle treatment sound like a load of rich gifts, and the summons to a king's feast. Then suddenly Neagle felt ashamed. To hear that he was considered a case for the gentle treatment overwhelmed him and made him blush in the dark. It was like being publicly praised. when you and all the audience knew that the praise was not deserved. Neagle hid his blushes in the rough blanket. There was a silence. Then the first voice spoke to Neagle quite close. "You've been listening," it said. "Yes," said Neagle. "Well, what have you to say?" "Could you tell me about Parrish?" said Neagle. "I should like to see him again. I hope he is not very ill. Can you cure his leg? It seemed to give him a wretched time. And please don't worry about him and me. He was a very good neighbor, and he let me have excellent potatoes, very cheap, which saved me a lot of time." "Did he?" said the first voice. "I'm glad to hear it." There was another silence. Have to change pages. Neagle heard the voices receding. "Well, I agree," he heard the first voice say in the distance. "Let him go on to the next stage. Tomorrow, if you like." So this is really Tolkien imagining how he's going to get into heaven. He's going, he dies, his work is unfinished, and he's going to be put into purgatory, and he's going to just sort of try to make the best of it. And eventually they're going to weigh the things that he did and the things that he did not do. And he thinks, well, if I manage to get to the next stage, it is because of mercy. And that's the second voice there, giving him mercy. Neagle woke up to find that his blinds were drawn and his little cell was full of sunshine. He got up and found that some comfortable clothes had been put out for him, not hospital uniform. After breakfast, the doctor treated his sore hands, putting some salve on them that healed them at once. He gave Neagle some good advice and a bottle of tonic in case he needed it. In the middle of the morning, they gave Neagle a biscuit and a glass of wine, and then they gave him a ticket. "You can go to the railway station now," said the doctor. "The porter will look after you. Goodbye." Neagle slipped out of the main door and blinked a little. The sun was very bright. See, I just want to pause here because you guys get it. You guys get it, right? And that's the point of Allegory. It's not something that people argue over or go back and forth on. It's something that you just immediately understand. Just like if you read the Chronicles of Narnia, you immediately understand that Aslan is Jesus. It's very obvious. I mean, they even try to crucify him in the first book. It's all out there and just very, very obvious, which is why it's kind of wild when people say, well, the Lord of the Rings is obviously an allegory for this or an allegory for that, and they never agree with each other on what it's an allegory for, because it's not an allegory. And unless you have a first edition, the very first part of it tells you it's not allegory, not topical, nothing to do with World War I or World War II or any real wars, and if it was, it would be very different, All right, we're almost at the end here. Neagle slipped out of the main door and blinked a little. The sun was very bright. Also, he had expected to walk into a large town to match the size of the station, but he did not. He was on the top of a hill, green, bare, swept by a keen, invigorating wind. Nobody else was about. Away down the hill, he could see the roof of the station shining. He walked downhill to the station briskly, but without hurry. The porter spotted him at once. "This way," he said, and led Neagle to a bay, in which there was a very pleasant little local train standing, one coach and a small engine, both very bright, clean, and newly painted. It looked as if this was their very first run. Even the track that lay in front of the engine looked new. The rails shone, the chairs were painted green, and the sleepers gave off a delicious smell of fresh tar in the warm sunshine. The coach was empty. "Where does this train go, porter?" said Neagle. "I don't think they have fixed its name yet," said the porter. "But you'll find it all right." He shut the door. The train moved off at once. Neagle lay back in his seat. The little engine puffed along in a deep cutting with high green banks roofed with blue sky. It did not seem very long before the engine gave a whistle. The brakes were put on and the train stopped. There was no station and no signboard, only a flight of steps up the green embankment. At the top of the steps there was a wicket gate and a trim hedge. By the gate stood a bicycle, at least it looked like his, and there was a yellow label tied to the bars with Neagle written on it in large black letters. Neagle pushed open the gate, jumped on the bicycle, and went bowling downhill in the spring sunshine. Before long, he found that the path in which he had started had disappeared, and the bicycle was rolling over a marvelous turf. It was green and close, and yet he could see every blade distinctly. He seemed to remember having seen or dreamed of that sweep of grass somewhere or other. The curves of the land were familiar somehow. Yes, the ground was becoming level, as it should. And now, of course, it was beginning to rise again. A great green shadow came between him and the sun. Nigel looked up and fell off his bicycle. Before him stood the tree. His tree, finished. If you could say that of a tree that was alive, its leaves opening, its branches growing and bending, in a wind that Nigel had so often felt or guessed, and had so often failed to catch, he gazed at the tree, and slowly he lifted his arms and opened them wide. "It's a gift," he said. He was referring to his art, and also to the result, but he was using the word quite literally. He went on looking at the tree. All the leaves he had ever labored at were there as he imagined them, rather than as he had made them. And there were others that he had only budded in his mind, and many that might have budded if he had had time. Nothing was written on them. They were just exquisite leaves, yet they were dated as clear as a calendar. Some of the most beautiful and the most characteristic, the most perfect examples of the Nigel style were seen to have been produced in collaboration with Mr. Parrish. There was no other way of putting it. The birds were building in the tree, astonishing birds. How they sang! They were mating, hatching, growing wings, and flying away, singing into the forest, even while he looked at them, for now he saw that the forest was there too, opening out on the other side and marching away into the distance. The mountains were glimmering far away. After a time, Nigel turned toward the forest. Not because he was tired of the tree, but he seemed to have got it all clear in his mind now, and was aware of it, and of its growth, even when he was not looking at it. As he walked away, he discovered an odd thing. The forest, of course, was a distant forest, yet he could approach it, even enter it, without losing that particular charm. Let's pause here for a moment. And let me catch up on chat a little bit here. Yeah, the patch notes say that purgatory is not a thing. They patched that out of like Catholic Church 3.0. Yeah, but of course in Tolkien's time, he would have believed in purgatory, of course. And what we're seeing here is his dream. This is his heaven, his work finished, and not finished by him, but in concert with others. In this case, Mr. Parrish, the only person he really knew all that well. Is purgatory meant to be like the halls of Mandos? Kinda, sorta. Mandos is interesting because it's a few different things. For the elves, it could be a purgatory, absolutely. For the dwarves, it's like the waiting room from Beetlejuice, And for men, it's like a station that they wait at and wait for their train and move on. So Mandos is different things to different peoples, and like to Morgoth, it was a prison. To Feanor, it's also a prison. But it's purgatorial without literally being purgatory. Yeah, the waiting room. I'm a big fan of Beetlejuice. I really like that film. But yeah, it's sort of like that for men, or for dwarves rather, Where if you look at the sequel to the Soul Train, that's what it's like for men. We get on a train and we go somewhere, to the great beyond. As my friend Aryan would call it. All right, let's continue here. We're almost finished here. Let's see. Where was I? He had never before been able to walk into the distance without turning it to mere surroundings. It really added a considerable attraction to walking in the country because as you walked, new distances opened out, so that you now had doubled, treble, and quadruple distances, doubly, trebly, and quadruply enchanting. You could go on and have a whole country in that garden, or in a picture if you preferred to call it that. You could go on, but not perhaps forever. There were the mountains in the background. They did get nearer very slowly. They did not seem to belong to the picture, or only as a link to something else. A glimpse through the trees of something different. A further stage. Another picture. Nigel walked about, but he was not merely pottering. He was looking round carefully. The tree was finished, though not finished with just the Just the other way, about to do what it used to be, he thought. But in the forest there were a number of inconclusive regions that which still needed work and thought. Nothing needed altering any longer. Nothing was wrong as far as it had gone, but it needed continuing up to a definite point. Neagle saw the point precisely in each case. He sat down under a great, very beautiful distant tree, a variation of the great tree, but quite individual, or it would be with little more attention, and he considered where to begin work and where to end it and how much time was required. He could not quite work out his scheme. Of course, he said, what I need is parish. There are lots of things about earth and plants and trees that he knows and I don't. This place cannot be left just as my private park. I need help and advice. I ought to have got it sooner. He got up and walked to the place where he had decided to begin work. He took off his coat. Then down in a little sheltered hollow hidden from a further view he saw a man looking round rather bewildered. He was leaning on a spade, but plainly did not know what to do. Neagle hailed him. Parish, he called. Parish shouldered his spade and came up to him. He still limped a little. They did not speak, just nodded as they used to do, passing in the lane. But now they walked about together arm in arm. Without talking, Neagle and Parish agreed exactly where to make the small house and garden which seemed to be required. As they wandered together, it became plain that Neagle was now the better of the two at ordering his time and getting things done. Oddly enough, it was Neagle who became most absorbed in the building and gardening, while Parish often wandered about looking at trees, and especially at the tree. One day Neagle was busy planting a quickset hedge, and Parish was lying on the grass nearby, looking attentively at a beautiful and shapely little yellow flower growing in the green turf. Neagle had put a lot of them among the roots of his tree long ago. Suddenly Parish looked up. His face was glistening in the sun, and he was smiling. This is grand, he said. I oughtn't to be here, really. Thank you for putting in a word for me. Nonsense, said Neagle. I don't remember what I said, but anyway, it was not nearly enough. Oh, yes, it was, said Parish. It got me out a lot sooner. That second voice, he had me sent here. He said you had asked to see me. I owe it to you. No, you owe it to the second voice, said Neagle. We both do. So what he's saying here is, he put in a good word for Parish, his neighbor, and Parish is saying, I'm thanking you, and he's saying, don't thank me, thank God. That's basically what's happening there. The fact is, it's impossible to write without allegory. No, that's not true. Because, like I said, allegory is something that you do consciously. You don't do it subconsciously. That is what Tolkien referred to as an application. You conveying a message is not an allegory. Every story is a message, but not every story is an allegory. And this is what Tolkien meant when he said most people don't even know what an allegory is. We're not quite done yet. I just wanted to pause there. We've got a few pages here. Let's try to finish it. Let's see. They went on living and working together, I do not know how long. It is no use denying that at first they occasionally disagreed, especially when they got tired. For at first they did sometimes get tired. They found that they had both been provided with tonics. Each bottle had the same label, a few drops to be taken in water from the spring before resting. They found the spring in the heart of the forest. Oh! Thank you for the super chat there. Core Purgatory is still Catholic doctrine. Talk about the doors of night. A boundary, really, not purgatory. Yes, no, the doors of night absolutely is a boundary. The doors of night is where the created world ends. And it's basically saying that if you go back beyond this point, you're no longer in the created world. That's what the doors of night is. And we don't know if there literally was the doors of night or if that was just something the elves believed. But Tolkien used the term purgatorial a few times in reference to the legendarium, such as the Noldor choosing, not being forced to, but choosing to live a purgatorial sojourn in the Isle of Tol Eressëa. Not something that was forced to them. They were fully forgiven. They could have come to Eldamar or even Valinor and lived wherever they pleased, but they put it on themselves. Mandos could be seen as purgatorial in that it's temporary, but it's not literally purgatory. So I appreciate the. I thought that they. Oh, you know what it was? I think it was limbo they got rid of. I know that there was something that they said is not doctrine anymore. I don't really follow this stuff that closely, but I think it was limbo. But thank you for the correction there. Like I said, I'm not. I'm certainly not a Catholic scholar, but there you go. It's 9:14 in the morning. Okay. Oh, don't worry. We only have a few pages left here, and I'm probably going to end stream not too long after that, guy. Thank you so for so many super chats, Core. That is really, really amazing of you. That is really awesome. Okay. Let's see. As their work drew to an end, they allowed themselves more and more time for walking about, looking at the trees and the flowers and the lights and shapes and the lie of the land. Sometimes they sang together, and Neagle found that he was now beginning to turn his eyes more and more often toward the mountains. The time came when the house in the hollow. Limbo's gone? Yeah, I thought so. That's what it was. Sometimes I confuse the two. Limbo's a little different than Purgatory. The garden, the grass, the forest, the lake, all the country was nearly complete in its own proper fashion. The great tree was in full blossom. "We shall finish this evening," said Parrish one day. "After that we will go for a really long walk." They set out the next day, and they walked until they came right through the distances to the edge. Dylan, thank you for the super chat. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Purgatory remains. Okay. Do you want a guide? Oh, wait, I skipped a part here. Pray zero always, of course, yes. Let's see. It was not visible, of course. There was no line or fence or wall, but they knew they had come to the margin of that country. They saw a man. He looked like a shepherd. He was walking toward them down the grass slopes that led up to the mountains. "Do you want a guide?" he asked. "Do you want to go on?" For a moment the shadow fell between Neagle and Parrish, for Neagle knew that he did now want to go on, and in a sense ought to go on, but Parrish did not want to go on, and was not yet ready to go. "I must wait for my wife," said Parrish to Neagle. She'd be lonely. I rather gathered that they would send her after me some time or another when she was ready, and when I had got things ready for her. The house is finished now, as well as he could make it, but I should like to show it to her. She'll be able to make it better, I expect, more homely. I hope she'll like this country, too." He turned to the shepherd. "Are you a guide?" he asked. "Could you tell me the name of this country?" "Don't you know?" said the man. "It is Neagle's country. It is Neagle's picture, or most of it. A little of it is now Parrish's garden." "Neagle's picture," said Parrish in astonishment. "Did you think of all this, Neagle? I never knew he was so clever. Why didn't you tell me?" "He tried to tell you long ago," said the man, "but you would not look. He had only got canvas and paint in those days, and you wanted to mend your roof with them. This is what you and your wife used to call Neagle's nonsense, or that daubing. But it did not look like this then." "Not real," said Parrish. "No, it was only a glimpse then," said the man. "But you might have caught the glimpse if you had ever thought it worth while to try." "I did not give you much chance," said Neagle. "I never tried to explain. I used to call you old earth grubber, but what does it matter? We have lived and worked together. Now, things might have been different, but they could not have been better. All the same, I am afraid that we shall have to be going on. We shall meet again, I expect. There must be many more things we can do together. Goodbye." He shook Parrish's hand warmly, a good, firm, honest hand it seemed, and he turned and looked back for a moment. The blossom on the great tree was shining like flame. All the birds were flying in the air and singing. Then he smiled, and he nodded to Parrish and went off with the shepherd. He was going to learn about sheep and the high pasturages, and look at a wider sky, and walk even further and further towards the mountains, always uphill. Beyond that I cannot guess what became of him. Even little Neagle in his own home, turning the page, could sorry, they stick together a little. It's an old book. I suppose most of my books are kind of old. The old mountains far away, and they got into the borders of his picture, but what they really like and what lies beyond them, only those can say that have climbed them. "I think he was a silly little man," said the Councillor Tompkins. "Worthless, in fact. No use to society at all." "I don't know," said Atkins, who was nobody of importance, just a schoolmaster. "I'm not so sure. It depends on what you mean by use." "No practical or economic use," said Tompkins. "I Dare say he could have been made into a serviceable cog of some sort if you schoolmasters knew your business. But you don't, and so we get useless people of his sort. If I ran this country, I should put him and his like to some job that they're fit for, washing dishes in a communal kitchen or something, and I should see that they did it properly, or I would put them away. I should have put him away long ago. Put him away? You mean you'd have made him start on his journey before his time? Yes, if you must use that meaningless old expression. Push him through the tunnel into the great rubbish heap, that's what I mean. Then you don't think that painting is worth anything, not worth preserving or improving or even making use of? Of course, painting has uses, said Tompkins, but you couldn't make use of his painting. There was plenty of scope for bold young men, not afraid of new ideas and new methods, none of this old-fashioned stuff. Private daydreaming. He could not have designed a telling poster to save his life, always fiddling with leaves and flowers. I asked him once why. He said he thought they were pretty. Can you believe it? He said pretty. What digestive and genital organs of plants, I said to him, and he had nothing to answer. Silly fooler. Footler, sighed Atkins. Yes, poor little man. He never finished anything. Ah, well, his canvases have been put to better uses since he went. But I am not sure, Tompkins. You remember that large one? The one they used to patch the damaged house next door to his after the gales and floods? I found a corner of it torn off, lying in a field. It was damaged, but legible. A mountain peak and a spray of leaves. I can't get it out of my mind. Out of your what? Said Tompkins. Who are you two talking about? Said Perkins, intervening in the cause of peace. Atkins had flushed rather red. The name is not worth repeating, said Tompkins. I don't know why we are talking about him at all. He did not live in town. No, said Atkins, but you had your eye on his house all the same. That is why you used to go and call and sneer at him while drinking his tea. Well, you've got his house now, as well as the one in town, so you need not grudge his name. We were talking about Neagle, if you want to know, Perkins. Oh, poor little Neagle, said Perkins. Never knew he painted. That was probably the last time that Neagle's name ever came up in conversation. However, Atkins preserved the odd corner. Most of it crumbled, but one beautiful leaf remained intact. Atkins had it framed. Later he left it to the town museum, and for a long while Leaf by Neagle hung there in a recess and was noticed by a few eyes. But eventually the museum was burnt down, and the Leaf and Neagle were entirely forgotten in his old country. It is proving very useful indeed, said the second voice. As a holiday and a refreshment, it is splendid for convalescence, and not only for that, for many it is the best introduction to the mountains. It works wonders in some cases. I am sending more and more there. They seldom have had to come back. No, that is so, said the first voice. I think we shall have to give the region a name. What do you propose? The porter settled on that some time ago, said the second voice. Trained for Neagle's parish in the bay. He has shouted that for a long while now. Neagle's parish. I sent a message to both of them to tell them. What did they say? They both laughed. Laughed. The mountains rang with it. So there you see some very dark thoughts that Tolkien had about himself towards the end there. That's what he thought people would think of him after he was gone. That maybe that he would pass into the great beyond and be happy and free and be in fellowship with his neighbors and be able to finish his work and be at peace. But that people would say, what a useless sort of fellow writing these silly stories, what use is that? And of course, that didn't happen, thankfully. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here talking to you guys, right? If we forgot about Tolkien, what would I be doing right now? Something else entirely. But, but this is what he thought. This is what he thought was going to happen. He thought, oh, my whole legendarium is going to be just gone from memory. Nobody's going to remember it. And maybe somebody will preserve some small little bit, like the Hobbit or something, and that's going to go in a museum. And then the museum's going to be burned down, and nobody's going to think about me anymore, and that's going to be it, right? I didn't get, much done. And what I got done, people are not going to really appreciate. And I think, like I said, he's a little depressing ending there in a way, but also uplifting in the fact that we know that this didn't happen. We know that this didn't happen. So we know that he was wrong about that, and we also know that that he's happy. At least Neagle is happy. We hope Tolkien is happy, right? But what we have here, like I said, that is the only true allegory. They said allegory is something that we do on purpose. It's not something that we do accidentally. And this was the only time that he wrote something in an allegorical sense, was Leaf by Neagle. And I really wanted to highlight this view because the people say, well, this is, the Hobbit's an allegory, or the Silmarillion is full of allegory, or you can't write without allegory. And it's not true, because Tolkien did it all the time, you know. And when you see him set out to actually write an allegory, it's very, very different, because all the things that he's saying are two things. They're very obvious, and they're, oh, what is the word? Unambiguous. There is no doubt what he's conveying. There's no arguments to be had. There's no great debate. It is what it is. You know, Tolkien's books are. Oh, okay. Sorry, I'm on Wi-Fi. If it blipped there, that's on me. Tolkien's books are more the tome collection, dust on a shelf, and said they're a part of. Yeah, absolutely. That's the thing. He thought that eventually he's going to be forgotten, and now these characters, like the one who said, "Oh, what use is that? What use is it to paint something just because you think it's pretty, or to write a language just because you think it's fair?" Which is what he was really getting at there. And I do see this attitude from time to time. It's happened to me a few times on Quora. I've written thousands of articles on Tolkien on Quora, and answered so many people's questions, and all this, and mused and analyzed and broken things down and put them back together. And occasionally, very occasionally, I'll get these comments that'll say, well, it's all fictional, that, right? And I'll always respond to that in a very, very sarcastic manner. I need you to clean up the chat. So, I'll respond to that in a sort of a sarcastic fashion, like, what? It's fiction. Are you kidding me? That's why they sold it in the fiction section of the bookstore. Oh, thank you for telling me. Of course it's fiction. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't do that. I had this one person, and it was really interesting, because when you look into these people are not uneducated, right? Every time I get a comment like this, I look into it, and they have like a PhD, or something like that, right? And when it comes down to it, is that there are people who can't understand why anybody would study something that in their estimation is not real and therefore does not matter, and I get these comments very, very occasionally. It's happened like 3 or 4 times, where they'll say, you're wasting your time, or you're doing something that's of no use to anybody, or all Tolkien wrote were just a bunch of silly stories about orcs and they don't matter. And I said, well, if that was true, I wouldn't be talking about them. And I can talk about what I want to talk about, just like you could talk about what you want to talk about. And, so, so we get a lot of, people who appreciate the sort of thing that I do. But occasionally you get these people like, yes, it's just some silly stories about like elves and stuff. It doesn't mean anything, or it doesn't matter. You should focus on things that matter. Hey, Kurt. So, oh no, you know what? No, hey, Kurt, what is with YouTube? This is why I don't stream on YouTube as much as I do. I just see a person name, oh, hey there. Oh, man, I just read your message. You're an idiot. Yeah, well, they're not dismissing it as bad. They're dismissing it as it doesn't matter. It's unimportant, right? Yeah, don't get mad. Because here's the thing. Don't get mad about it, because that's like sort of the goal, right? When people say things like that, they want to. It's what they call rage bait. They want to get you angry, right? Now, see, this is the real thing that doesn't matter, that you shouldn't pay any mind to. You just ban them and move on. It's like, oh, well, there's another one. Just flick. More annoying. Yeah, it is annoying. But I've been dealing with that kind of thing for a really long time, and occasionally I get this sort of thing on Quora. Not very often on YouTube. Yesterday and today. Thank you, Core, for another super chat. You love Sand Metal. Is so beautiful. However, it is destroyed as soon as it's finished. A point not lost on you. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. But you know what? And I know Token wasn't big on technology, but I am. With the cool thing about it is that you could always take a picture, right? That's sort of the good thing about the way that we are now, right? When I was a kid, we had like the Etch a Sketch, which actually did involve sand. I didn't know that at the time, but we had the Etch a Sketch, and you would make these little pictures, and then you'd eventually have to erase it, right? We didn't have a way of saving anything that we made, right? Nowadays, you would just you take a picture of it with your phone or something, or you wouldn't be using an Etch a Sketch. You would be using a tablet or something. Sure, you can ask a question or two. Absolutely. I'm going to end soon, but I absolutely can answer a few questions. Let me just have a bottle of water somewhere. I don't know where it is. Oh, here it is. I'm very thirsty after all that. Yeah, I do want to end soon. I could just do a reading for you at like next time I stream. Uh, Unfortunately, I still don't have my computer. It is bad philosophy. You're right. Here's the thing, though. Here's the thing, Time Lord, and this is I truly believe this. It is okay to not care about something, right? There's a lot of people who don't care about the Lord of the Rings, or they don't care about Tolkien, and they think it's all very pointless, right? That's okay. They can have that opinion. Um, but what does that have to do with me, right? Why does their silly opinion have to be brought upon me, right? My favorite piece of jewelry in the Legendarium, never gave that any thought, really. Most of the jewelry is rather ominous, isn't it? You know what? I'll say Narya. Or Narya. Narya, I think, is the most interesting one. The point is impermanence. No matter the complexity or beauty of the form, all passes away. Absolutely. And I said earlier, we're all temporary, right? We're not going to be here forever. We have a limited. The Ring of Power here is really. Yeah, well, I mean, that was also like Aragorn gave that to Arwen. That was like his engagement ring, right? I mean, and Bauer here, I mean, that goes way back. That's Baron's father, so this is one of the oldest artifacts of mortal man in Middle Earth. But yeah, I would say Narya, the Red Ring, or the Ring of Fire, if you prefer that, the one with the ruby on it that Círdan had and the Labour gave to Gandalf. Um, but yeah, it's like okay, like these people come along, and I always say to them, it's funny if you don't like fantasy literature, you don't like Tolkien, you don't like the Lord of the Rings, you don't like any of this, right? You think it's all silly and foolish and useless and all that, right? But here's the thing: you just commented on one of my answers, and now the algorithm thinks you're interested in that. You're going to be seeing a lot of it, and I'm going to think that's very funny. I'm going to think that's very funny. I'm going to chuckle at that. They're going to be like, "Why is this in my Quora digest?" Right? It's because you left a comment on it, right? That's why I never comment on anything that doesn't have anything to do with Togen, because I'm not trying to have Quora send me a whole bunch of nonsense. Although they do. I had a meeting with a few people that work at Quora over what do you call it, over Zoom, specifically about the digests and the sort of like nonsense that I get in the digest, which is almost entirely the sort of like really divisive political stuff that comes through, and I'm like, what did I do that makes the algorithm think that that's what I want to see on Quora? And the answer that I initially got was that it's difficult for the algorithm to recommend Tolkien related content for me specifically because I've read it all. If there's an article out there, I've probably already seen it, so it's difficult for them to recommend it to me. And at first, I sort of just said, "Oh, okay, sure, yeah." I accepted that answer. But then I thought, no, wait, that doesn't make sense. Because I said, wouldn't you say that, all right, well, maybe he's seen all the Tolkien stuff. We can give him C.S. Lewis, or we could give him Shakespeare, or we could give him Charles Dickens, or we can give him Bram Stoker. Like I said, there are so many other authors out there. You just give me like just literature stuff in general. You know what I mean? And they said, well, there's a few Harry Potter things in there. Okay, yeah, there's that, but I'm saying that. But that's so modern, and also not really something that interests me. But at least that's a connection, right? But when I'm getting stuff about real world politics and stuff, and it's all very, very written in a way to make people angry, the rage bait that we talked about. Thank you again, Core, for another super chat. How many hater supers? Ignore and focus on others. I don't think I've seen a hater super. Haters don't usually want to give you money. But you know what? I think those people that come through here are not necessarily haters. They're not coming in here because they don't like me in particular. They don't know who I am. They don't know anything about me. They're just people who want to have a good time. And unfortunately for them, having a good time means disrupting other people's good time. And there's a lot of people out there whose idea of a good time is disrupting other people having a good time. And I forget who the quote originated. I think it might be Shakespeare, but I forget who the quote originated from, which is the best revenge is living well. So the best thing that we can do is to just laugh about it, because it's just pointless, right? They're going to come in here, they're going to say something ridiculous, they're going to get banned, and then maybe they go through the trouble of making another. You know what? Coyote looking at the positive side. Also, it just means that we're getting people who are looking at it, and the algorithm is pushing it out. I tend to think most of these people are children, right? They're children, or they're young men. They're usually young men. I don't think ladies do this sort of thing very often. I think when you see that kind of behavior, it's like 98% men, right? These young men that they don't have anything else going on in their life, and this is how they have a good time. And I don't want to tell them that they shouldn't have a good time, but maybe they could find something else that pleases them, right? Unfortunately, there are a lot of people in the world whose idea of a good time is making other people miserable, right? I think you meant cut. I don't think you meant cute or cute. I think you meant cut. That guy said he was a hairdresser. I think that's the guy that's doing this. I think that's the guy that's doing this, because he came in first and he was making all those weird comments, and I told him, like, wait, who cares, right? And then all of a sudden it started. Yeah. War pleases you? Well, like I said, that's strange. That's strange. That's weird. I don't think I don't think you're being truthful. I'm going to be honest with you. I think you're not being truthful at all. I don't think war pleases you. I don't think it does. I think that you're just being edgy. That's what I think. I think that you're just saying something to get a reaction, and that's what pleases you. That's what I think. That's your favorite thing to do. That's what they say, right? Yeah. There's nothing that could really stop a person from doing their favorite thing. I'd say, some people's favorite thing is just getting a reaction out of other people, and that's how it is. But anyway, guys, we're gonna call it a day. Thank you, everybody that came by, especially to I want to single out two people here, especially to Dylan, who is an excellent moderator and has kept the chat clean all night. And also, I want to especially thank Core 1138 for all the super chats, and also everybody else that did a super chat. Next stream, I don't know exactly when. I'm thinking I might stream like a Sunday night or something like that. I mean, I'll be streaming on Twitch, of course, but well, I have to figure that out, because I've had some technical issues with the app that I used to stream to Twitch, and I found out recently that I'm not the only one having that problem. So I think I'm just gonna have to pick a different app, But I think maybe Sunday night. Unfortunately, the package that I have going out to the West Coast, which is some parts for my computer so that the person can put it together, is delayed, and probably won't be there till Monday. And then they have to put it all together and send it to me. So there you have it. Good night, everybody. Have a great time.